Hello, everybody. Breeze evening. You might be wondering why am I saying breeze evening, not good evening. You will come to know very shortly. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for today's webinar, Compliance Regulatory Responding to Challenges. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a very exciting topic because we will talk about all the challenges currently facing by the compliance in the banking industry. Not only that, we will talk about the solutions as well. Right. So thank you for joining us and spending your valuable time with us. We hope this session would be more informative to you. Unfortunately, the world is facing a global pandemic, and India is no escape from that. Currently, we are on 115th day of lockdown in various parts in the country, including Mumbai. But we hope you are staying safe and working from home. Please travel if it is really required and maintain social distancing. So currently, prevention is the only cure for this disease, and as a responsible citizen, we all agree and we follow the same. Thank you. To introduce myself, I'm Dhanapalan from KGISL, leading sales and operations in India, and KGISL provides solution and services to various banks, insurance companies, and capital markets across India, APAC, US, and Australia. With me, I have an industry veteran who doesn't require an explicit introduction because most of you have already known him and some of you have already worked with him during his 30 years of experience in the banking compliance industry. He has worked in various top banks at senior managerial role, and it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Arun Kamath, principal from Compliance Matters, one of the leading independent compliance consulting firm. With that introduction, allow me to set up the context for today's topic before I hand it over to Mr. Arun. Right. So compliance, everybody will agree that the importance of compliance in the banking industry, right? Compliance makes sure banks follow the rules and laws and regulations, whether they are internal or external. And also it focuses to make sure bank will not deviate from any of the, focus to make sure that there is no deviation in the illegalities or non-conformatives in the operations. So if you ask me, if you ask anybody, and compliance is must for the bank. So compliance matters. So I think I got another opportunity to introduce my partner's firm here. And by saying so, and on the other side, if you see that banking industry is the one of the most regulated industry in the world, right? Banks are receiving a lot of regulatory changes from the statutory bodies, and they have to adhere that. By adhering these changes continuously, what will happen? Bank has to constantly change their complex compliance framework and governance. This is definitely incurring a lot of efforts, humongous efforts, manpower, and cost. So what these are the known challenges what I'm talking about. But Arun will talk about more challenges, hidden challenges from the industry standpoint based on his 30 years of experience in this compliance industry. Not only that, also how the challenges can be addressed. So this is where the KGSL plays a role, and along with the compliance matters, as a KGSL as a technology partner and compliance matters as a consulting partner, have come up with a solution that would try to address all these concerns. So let me not spill more beans here. So I think it's good time to call upon Arun to do his charismatic presentation. And during this session, I am very sure you would be getting a lot of thoughtful questions. So you are welcome to post all your questions in the Q&A box on the top right corner, along with your name. So we will try to answer your questions during this Q&A session. Even if we cannot do that, we will definitely answer your question post the session also. Thank you, and I would welcome to Arun to take over the stage. Thank you, Arun.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Dhanabalan, for that extensive, introduction and setting the stage. A warm welcome to all my friends who are here today from the industry, especially on a very rainy afternoon, rainy work from home afternoon. So welcome to you all again. I am very happy to see a number of people having registered for the webinar. And most of them are, friends and colleagues who have sort of taken the journey along with me for a long time. And to that extent, while it makes me very happy, but it also, I have to make a mental note not to preach to the choir. So while the subject is such that I have to go into a bit of detail so that some of the challenges resonate with all of you as regular practitioners, but also we can then finally lead to how do we then respond to these challenges. So without further ado, I would like to go on to the topic of today's webinar, regulatory compliance challenges, and how do we respond to that. When I talk about regulatory compliance challenges and the challenges of today, I cannot but trace it back a little away in time, especially to the financial crisis of 2008, because today's regulatory approach, as you can see, dates back to the aftermath of the regulatory, the financial crisis of 2008. So in a way, please bear with me while I sort of put a little bit of perspective on today's regulatory approach. If you look at the financial crisis, while I don't want to go too much into it, delve into it, but that brought the Lehman Brothers to extinction, and almost two other big league firms were almost there. And the financial system almost came to the brink before some kind of a rescue effort could happen. So what did regulators feel in that particular situation, right? So regulators generally then realized that most of the large financial institutions can no longer be relied upon to act responsibly or function in a very disciplined manner. So that essential trust that the regulator had on the system, as also on the participant in the system, went away. Also, a long-held assumptions that free markets have a way of self-correcting themselves was also belied. So to that extent, regulators became hugely concerned, and that led to what today we see as increasingly risk-focused and a complex set of regulations, very prescriptive at that, and accordingly, or consequently, reporting requirements that sort of profile these requirements. Now, I don't have to, literally trace and go back into history to tell you what kind of regulations were issued. All you do need to do is look at some of the risk management related, closer home in India. You have to just go through some of the risk management regulations to see the thickness of those directives and the complexity that is built in. Some of these things which we need a lot of time and a lot of patience to understand. That also meant that this deficit in trust also meant that regulators needed to be more hands-on to ensure that not only that there was some kind of adherence to these risk management prescriptions, but also ensure that these risk management controls and processes and anything else that they had prescribed in terms of business conduct was really working and effective. So that meant a hugely intense ongoing drive to sort of oversee what was happening in the industry. And similarly, preventive, action became some sort of the norm, right? So the regulators, of course, needed some way of deciphering signals of what was going wrong in the financial system or where risks were emerging. And therefore, a risk-based rating system was what most regulators developed. And closer home, we are now the rating of banks, or the risk rating of banks, is based on a sort of a formula derived around assessment of the various risks within the particular banking or financial institution. So that then became the sort of a critical basis for all further regulatory action and any kind of regime that they wanted to put across onto these banks. And finally, it was but obvious that the regulators had to be very demonstrative with the kind of action they wanted to take against the regulated entities, because that is the only way probably people will realize that the adherence to the laid down principles, regulations, and law was not something that can be compromised or played around with. So you had seen, right, there was, I don't have to tell you how much of billions of dollars that were disgorged by institutions as penalties. At the same time, Even in India, I thought as of today, show cause notices, which was supposed to be something which was very serious in nature, seems to be some sort of a norm with banks now. So it's only a question of degree in terms of how many show cause notices you are currently contending with, or how many are you sort of responding to. So whether it is actions, whether it is some kind of embargoes being placed, or huge humongous penalties, or even proactive orders of moratorium on banks. I mean, all kinds of actions are on the table today, if from regulators, to ensure that the financial system, the banking industry, the markets fall in line. So obviously, I mean, with this kind of a regulatory approach, this must have definitely from then on put a lot of pressure, and you can see that, right? Put a lot of pressure in terms of the risk management practices for various banks and financial institutions. And obviously, that has had an impact on the compliance, right? So what you see today versus what we were, let's say, going back 8 to 10 years, is a completely different profile of compliance. Okay, we always thought ourselves as intellectually oriented advisory people. So today, if you look at a typical compliance operating model, I mean, continues to be critical, but today advisory is no longer around just merely whatever regulations that the regulators are issuing, but around very specialized topics. One of them I have mentioned, which is risk management, right? I mean, risk management, I mean, literally, some of us had to revisit our maths, whether we liked it or not. And, as I said, some of these topics became extremely specialized. I mean, mis-selling came to the fore, other conduct related, whether it was around client due diligences or whether it was around conflict of interest, everything has come to the fore. I mean, just to give an example closer home, the indisciplined around granting of credit, or let us say even, the huge large borrower frauds that have happened in this country have led to a lot of, very prescriptive regulations around conduct. So today, if I have to look at it, each of these areas have become by themselves a discipline. Okay, so in some countries today, compliance officers are also called conduct officers. AML has got a life of its own in terms of being a discipline, right? And now, we don't even call it AML, we call it financial crime. It's so broad now. So whether it's financial crime, conduct, whether it is risk management, I mean, advisory has now extended to various specialized topics, and compliance has had to sort of keep step with it. It's not just that advisory has increased in its coverage and scope, but compliance officers have had to go beyond advisory, right? So if the regulators have been focused on risk, it was but obvious that compliance would also have to, literally, as an earlier governor of the Reserve Bank here in India called, compliance officers as some sort of proxies for the regulators within the organization. So in terms of that, compliance had also to go more and more hands-on. So which meant that not only had they to sort of, disseminate the regulatory information and change, advise on it, but also ensure that the required implementation happened in such a way that those prescriptions were adhered to on an ongoing basis. Not only that, it was also incumbent from an organizational point of view and as well as from a compliance point of view, because there was a regulatory expectation that the compliance would then also function like a risk management function. So I think in the last few years, you would have heard that compliance being referred to as one of the critical risk management functions. So which meant that they had to constantly provide oversight in terms of the control frameworks. They had to provide some kind of, extend some kind of assurance in terms of testing or monitoring short of audit for the various to ensure that whether those control processes that have been implemented were effective and working. And then there was this ongoing assessment, almost as a preemption to what the Reserve Bank could come and find, so that you could avoid regulatory surprises and ensure that you are keeping in line with the focus and concern of the Reserve Bank. So all in all, beyond advisory, compliance started being looked upon within the organization, backed by expectation from the regulator, as a critical risk management function, became an integral part of what was enterprise-wide risk management and what is now called as the 3 lines of defense. So clearly, as a risk management and risk control function, compliance is being seen as one of the second line control functions at the table when the 3 lines of defense program is implemented. So what does then, with this kind of a change, this one, this is not something new, or this is not something which is trending. This is something which has been normal, and we have almost started living with this kind of a normalcy for some time yet. And yet, we find that there are still some challenges in terms of, how we function, right, as compliance. So, and these challenges started off some time back, but now still have sort of got entrenched. And there are various ways in which we are already sort of looking at it and responding to it. But let's first focus on these challenges, right? The first challenge is around, the competencies. The maturity with which we can, handle increasingly complex regulation and make it not only understand those regulations in the intent and in the way in which it has been expressed by the regulator, but also be a bridge to translate that for the rest of the organization, right? So our insights, sort of to help others understand what exactly is the regulator saying in words and language that is internally understood, became a big challenging work for us, which meant that we had to develop sufficient competencies within our teams, within us and within our teams, to sort of understand these various topics that were kept coming up, right? So as I said, when it was a question of risk management, the huge mathematical content of the circulars was not only mind-boggling, but challenging to a lot of us. But I think we have, in some ways, managed to get around that. As I said, different disciplines developed in terms of whether it was anti-money laundering, whether it was conflict of interest management, whether it was mis-selling. We started talking and debating about suitability and appropriateness. I still am a little confused whether it is suitability of the client and appropriateness of the product or otherwise. But yes, so very specialized knowledge and competencies were required. Again, we talked about compliance officers becoming more and more hands-on, right? And the compliance operating model becoming more hands-on. So, the very fact that we had to go and track, follow up whether sufficient action was being taken to adjust the adherence frameworks, to reinforce controls, so that we were in compliance with the regulations, started increasing. So I don't know how many of us came to this, our compliance jobs and careers with project management skills. But today it has become one of the most essential skills to have, right? Critical skills to have. You might say that it's not core, but it's definitely critical. Same way, review, monitoring the effectiveness of controls, and on an ongoing, giving an assurance both to the management and to the regulators that these things work. Now, we were never auditors, but we have had to develop skill sets which were very close to what an audit would do. At the same time, as I said, as a risk management function, we had to do the dipsticks to ensure that on an ongoing basis and a more frequent basis, what risks were emerging, assess those risks, and ensure that there are processes to mitigate them. So it's not just competencies; it also meant new skill sets. And the challenges were not only to sort of getting those skill sets, but where do you get those skill sets from? I mean, as I said, each of these are very specialized areas and disciplines. So if somebody were to be told that, an expert in reviews and monitoring were to be told that, he or she would work in compliance, how would we position that to that person, or, that kind of segment of people, to ensure that we attract them? Okay. Would then, the compliance operating model give enough importance to this work so that, they see this as mainstream work rather than as some kind of an adjunct to the advisory function? So these are some of the challenges that we even today face. And we today, I mean, if you look at all of our teams in various banks, I'm sure, and compare it with what we had, say, 8 to 10 years back, you would see that, there has been a multiple increase in the team strengths, in the headcounts, all that to respond to these kind of challenges, and all that to respond to the expanding role of compliance. But yet, if you look at what these scarce resources are increasingly putting up in terms of challenges and difficulty, is that most of their time is already spent on critical but probably not so core administrative workload of disseminating, collaborating, tracking, follow up, etc. Just try to see how much time of ours goes in what we used to earlier spend in terms of research, in terms of relationships, in terms of providing advice, to what we spend on more and more administrative work. At the same time, there is huge pressure on resources to ensure that we constantly keep an ear to the ground and respond to regulators, and constantly make them aware that we are doing the right things, and our controls are effective, our compliance frameworks work, we have the right kind of operating model, etc. Because the regulator is now more and more ongoing basis, intrusive, and literally onto us in terms of questions about what we do and how we do it. So even where we have jumped up the resources are under tremendous pressure. And I don't have to then finally talk about the current times, right? The COVID work environment, whatever else it has posed challenges to in terms of health, safety, and the economy, at least at the work environment level, it has completely expedited the already continuing trend of the environment being digitally managed. So we have had to up our skills to be digitally present and work digitally. So which means that today, for example, even regulatory interaction and interface has gone virtual. Can't help it. Risk management and monitoring activity has to be driven by through online channels and or based on data, because you can no longer be physically present. So it's already happening. And organizations are now, and it will all resonate with you. Organizations are already looking at the organizational structures to see what makes sense in a post-COVID work environment. Okay, it's not just from a health and safety perspective and for responding to the challenges, but also they are looking at opportunities to optimize their costs. I mean, do we then need real estate in expensive places? Or do we now allow people to work virtually, work remotely, or work from home, and ensure that still things are kept running? And then who becomes the prime candidate during such a time? Along with a few other functions, compliance is what I have been talking to my friends in the industry. Compliance is one of the functions which is a prime candidate to work virtually or remotely. Questions are being asked to ensure or to find out, to survey as to what is possible from a compliance point of view in terms of its operating model to base or to work from a virtual place or from a home kind of an environment. So you see, so this is now going to further complicate the situation of challenging competencies, acquiring newer and different skill sets, managing the kind of demand on bandwidth and resources. We have the now this one of the digital challenge. So challenges are not so hidden; they are obvious, and we are all facing that from a on our ongoing basis. So, how has the industry then responded so far? I mean, it's not something. Most of them are not new, right? So, until now, at least what I have seen and what I can submit to you is that the main and ongoing response has been a quantum increase in compliance resources. Just put more and more headcount to the job, right? Get more hands onto the deck, and in a way that's been happening. And somehow the compliance segment within the industry has expanded to that extent. But is that a lasting and sustainable solution? Is what we need to see. I do remember, it was around 2014, 2013 or 14, and I was at that point in time doing a global role at in a international financial center, and we saw one of the top American bank CEO, say that, and the number was around 3,000 odd. He said, "We are going to hire more than 3,000 compliance officers, and we're going to ensure that compliance is given the kind of prominence." Right now, in a way, that was something which many of us at the global level at that point in time looked on with a great amount of awe in terms of the humongous response that was being contemplated. At the same time, we were aghast. We said, where are we going to get these compliance resources from? Okay, in those days, the best of banks had about globally not more than, 600 to 700 compliance officers. And we were talking, and one particular organization, probably the largest bank today, was talking about more than 3,000 new hires. So not only were we aghast and we were nonplussed in terms of where these resources are coming, but we were wondering what kind of competition and wage war that is going to come up, especially during the time that we were already having huge pressure on costs, and the compliance costs themselves were increasing. But at the same time, individually, probably some of us were secretly very happy, because that would mean that we were very much in demand, and there would be a quantum increase in our values. So, but that shows the challenge, in terms of continually increasing compliance resources. There is no unlimited pool of compliance resources. I'm not even talking about skilled compliance resources. I'm just talking about compliance resources. So this particular response, besides the fact that, we will not get enough compliance officers, what is these resources going to do, right? The resources have been more and more engaged in the administrative and the logistical part of the compliance operating framework. Okay, even today, we don't think new skill sets are, we are successfully adopted new skill sets or brought in the required competencies. The numbers may have increased, but the specializations and the knowledge base, I don't know whether we have been successful in doing that in a very efficient manner. At the same time, obvious to say, manual initiatives are going to be, that much more ad hoc, personalized, and therefore, when we talk about standardization, quality, and probably the requirement for scaling in an institutional kind of setup, that's going to be very difficult. I don't have to emphasize this aspect, because institutionalizing a compliance framework requires just not more than just resources. I could talk about culture also, but today, from a perspective of what the industry response has been and could be, I would say, given that this is not sustainable, increase in compliance resources, I would focus on how can we harness technology. Therefore, not technology just for the sake of technology, not technology because everybody else is looking at technology, but because technology, where technology can provide us efficiencies, take away the administrative overload, leverage data, make us more intelligent in terms of what we do, and create the functional sophistication required in the various activities that requires a huge amount of skill and standardization and quality. For example, risk assessment, for example, testing and monitoring, right? So in that sense, technology is probably the solution we should be looking for. And it's not that, technology has not been looked into. I mean, it's not something very black and white. As you see, regulatory oversight is now already technology driven. I mean, I don't have to tell you about the kind of automation that regulators are driving everywhere. In India, even from a risk monitoring and a risk surveillance perspective, regulators have now gone into risk-based supervision, which is basically huge amount of automated reporting and data flow. At the same time, banks themselves, although egged on and prompted by fintechs, have finally gone the digital way. They have no choice. So banks, in their interaction with clients and in the kind of products that they are bringing, they are already, capitalizing on digital technology. And even in the case in the regulatory sphere and the compliance sphere, what is now increasingly being called as RegTech solutions has emerged. But I mean, does that mean that we have fully harnessed technology? Probably not. My experience tells me solutions have been brought in a very ad hoc manner, sometimes in very narrow areas, like for example, automating a reporting particular utility or a process here and there, and more as a fix for and troubleshooting for some problems that have arisen in particular areas. But never has it been a holistic approach in terms of how can we harness technology for the entire sort of a compliance operating model or the life cycle of compliance, right? It does not address the full life cycle. So, and at the same time, when we talk about technology, it's about automation, or it is about some process being workflow being automated, etc. It is not harnessing the full potential of what modern technology can offer, or the kind of data capabilities that we can acquire. So in that sense, I think while technology has emerged in this area, for compliance, it's still a long way. So, but then, I mean, as I said, technology is the real trend we should be looking for and the answer to many of our challenges. Then what does a holistic solution from a technology point of view looks like, right? Of course, automated compliance framework has to be the answer, but how do we automate and what does it mean, right? So first, I mean, as I said about competencies, I mean, how can technology increase our competencies, right? I'm not going into artificial intelligence as yet, or I'm not talking about robo advisory, etc., where some of these things can be automated, including advisory. But I'm saying, how can we equip ourselves, support ourselves, and complement what we know with some kind of expert knowledge? And this is what some kind of technology can be built, which can sort of import that and source it for us. So therefore, how can we then get ongoing awareness and understanding of regulatory changes? How can we get expert and market-based analysis on what is required in terms of implementation and response? So this is more speaking to the supporting competencies and complementing competencies. Second portion is, how can it make us more intelligent, right? Look at data analytics and management. I mean, it is such an advanced field today. Employing or deploying it in compliance could give us data at our fingertips to ensure that we are on top of what risks are arising, where controls are breaking, and therefore in a position to advise management on preventive, steps. At the same time, can we not create an intelligent database of regulatory information? Okay, when I say intelligent, it means that it's not just a database of regulatory information which we can anyway get on the website anywhere, but something that ties up to our product, something that ties up to our risks, and then therefore gives us a more intelligent view of what are the impacting regulations, what are the impacting regulatory expectations, etc. So, And that can help us not only in testing and monitoring, but also in the risk management, and of course in our advisory. And finally, automation, right? Why can't we take away that administrative and logistical overload of activities upon us by developing automated workflows? Think about it. Anything that we do in terms of tracking, following, managing, and overseeing implementation, conducting ongoing periodic reviews and monitorings and testing, enabling risk management or monitoring, all of these activities can clearly go into some kind of a digitization and automation. And that is one of the probably the simplest and what can I call low hanging fruit for somebody to sort of get into. So I think there is a lot that we can do with technology, and that sort of set us thinking, right? So when I got together with KGISL, and we started brainstorming, so conceptually, this is what I had in mind, the solution. And KGISL was up, immediately in terms of identifying technology that could help, and helping me sort of power that particular solution through technology. And that sort of has given rise to something. Before I close, I need to sort of get to show you how we have translated our thoughts and our ideas into some kind of a life cycle management tool for compliance. And that's the reason why Dhanabal mentioned Breeze. We call it Breeze because the attempt here is to make compliance easy. And this is what we call Breeze, a compliance management system. What you can see here is that everything that we spoke about in terms of the compliance functions, the compliance operating model, whether it is management of regulatory change, whether it's management of actions that need to be taken, whether it is the assurance function in terms of monitoring, review, or self-assessment, or whether it is the risk management in terms of risk assessment and risk mitigation activity, or you just a tool for some people to interact with compliance in terms of either training or asking questions. All of these activities, which are absolutely normal for a compliance officer, could all be looked at from a technology tool perspective and made, and we can make life easier for compliance. Now, I don't want to go into a detailed demo, but just a few screenshots before we go on to questions of what you can expect from this kind of a system. Now, when I talked about regulatory change, you and the expertise, you need, this particular platform can provide, not only the ongoing regulatory changes. Here we're talking about RBI and SEBI, but this is a platform. And tomorrow, any regulations, whether Indian or overseas, can be, suitably incorporated here. Automatically, there is a flow of regulations. Not only regulations, but regulations and other notifications, speeches, pronouncements, etc., with a value add and enrichment around what is expected there, right? So this is just a dashboard of what can come in, okay, and what needs to be further disseminated. But this is a summary where I intend to show you that the enrichment that will come here will not only tell you which product it pertains to, where it will impact in terms of risk, but also what are the requirements distilled in language that can be understood within the organization, and which department or which stakeholder needs to sort of respond to that, and what is the action therefore that is required when you talk about such a requirement. With many other things that can sort of help compliance to ensure that it is properly implemented. Again, we talked about risk assessment. Let's try and bring sophistication into it. Here is one risk that I have picked up just to show you how a risk assessment can happen on a particular risk category. This particular application can, help you and support you in terms of every activity that you do. From that activity, a lot of data is generated. How can we collate that data and bring it up in a very cogent way against a particular risk? Like, for example, I pick conflict of interest, I should immediately get what are the impacting regulations, because already the regulatory changes are with you through the application. What are the actions that are happening with competition and peer group? That is also again coming through. Regulatory inquiries and scrutiny and action, which you have fed into that application to maintain a repository, can come up once you talk about a particular risk category. And then, because implementation, monitoring, review is also being managed through this application. When we talk about what are the controls in place, what controls are not working, what controls are not working, therefore, which are the action points that are still pending, all of that can come here. And then that allows us to assess what is the inherent risk here and what is the likelihood, given the control situation, that these particular risks can manifest. Now, here I am providing a simple risk methodology, assessment methodology, but it could be, any of your risk methodology that you adopt in your organization that could be, customized here. But I mean, just to depict as to how risk management can be made into a very sophisticated exercise, completely supported by the data that you already have, but today you are not able to leverage, and then arrive at some kind of an indicator in terms of where the risk is. Same way, monitoring and testing. I don't want to go in deeper into it. This dashboard tells you how you can plan, how you can run, your monitoring and testing program, and how you can monitor the status around each of these things. Same thing with findings. So when there are findings, whether they are findings of compliance testing, audit, or any other process implementation, that can be tracked here. You would know what is pending, with whom it is pending, and what action you need to take in terms of getting these resolved, right? And finally, management information. Data can help you do anything. Data is today's, we used to say information is power. Now that translation into data is power, right? So look at, dashboards that we can create. This is just an example. And, and these dashboards can be customized to get you whatever information there is in the repositories of this application to you. It could be proprietary information, it could be public information. All that you have allowed to be got into this application can be, analyzed and put up in a, intelligent manner for you as well as the senior management to take decisions. And it would be amiss on my part if I do not then also give you, just a 2-minute preview of what is the technology underlying this. And therefore, I will take the help of Dhanabalan to talk about the technology platform that is, the basis of this particular application. And then we'll move on to the question and answer. Dhanabalan, can you help me here?
Sure, Arun. Thank you. It was a magnificent presentation. So when it comes to the technology, after we name it Breeze, we don't want to give a storm of giving a heavy infrastructure, heavy investment on the infrastructure and other string. So what we did is we built this application entirely on the Microsoft O365 platform, right? So if you see, probably the slide will give you the tools or components we have used to build this application, the solution. It's each and everything we picked it from your day-to-day activity use. Probably you are using Microsoft Outlook and SharePoint, OneDrive. These all are your basic day-to-day tools you are using at your office work. In addition to that, there are various other few tools which we are using, which we have used to build this solution. Right, this is completely Microsoft O365 dependent solution, and we would like to call it this as a quick IIT. When I say IIT, is nothing but quick implementation, quick integration, quick turnaround, which means you can easily implement this solution and it can be integrated with any of your internal in-house systems, and the turnaround time would be very quick. So when I say the turnaround time, probably we can implement this solution in a week time. That is a max I'm talking about. And with that, I think the technology, if you need more information in the technology, we'll be happy to address you separately. And I think it's we can move to the Q&A session. Am I right, Arun?
Yeah, thank you, Dhanabalan. Yeah, that was, I think adequate. But there might be some questions, Dhana, for you when we talk about, there are on question on technology.
Sure.
But I'll come back to you. I'm,
sure.
We are open for questions, and I already see a number of them. So I'm trying to see which I can answer very easily. I'm just joking. And we will just take them one by one. Let me go with the first question. This is more around regulatory compliance, so let me handle that. I don't see who's sort of put this question, but do you see regulatory focus? Do you see regulatory focus increasing, shifting towards non-financial risk? I mean, the answer is very easy, right? Why are we talking about increasing or shifting towards non-financial risk? I think non-financial risk is already covered, right? If you look at what the regulator has been talking about, okay, let's, because you're talking about Indian environment, let's talk about India, right? Don't you already see the regulator talking about anti-money laundering as a huge focus topic? Don't we already see, a huge amount of focus earlier in this decade around mis-selling of financial products? We saw recently with some kind of high-profile CEOs coming into some sort of issues. Did we see conflict of interest arising? I mean, conflict of interest being something that regulators, governments, and enforcement authorities, trying to look at. So I think the focus on non-financial risk is there. I don't think that it's essentially going to shift in any undue manner towards non-financial risk, because if you look at it, the regulators are also concerned about the systemic risks. And when we talk about systemic risks, there is a huge amount of financial risk that they have to look at, right? And now there is a debate around whether these kind of regulations, which are called prudential regulations, is a subject matter of something that compliance should deal with. But willy-nilly, because of the way it is being handled, it is already there. So I don't know whether we can. I mean, the regulators would ever start moving away from financial system risks. And non-financial risks are already, as I said, already there. So I think the regulators are focused in a very balanced manner around both financial and non-financial risks. Then let's see who else, what other question we can take. And then, okay, I think this is something which is a forward-looking question. The world is changing. Should not act, just a minute. I think published that question. So let me see. The world is changing. Business models are changing. What is the major challenge for compliance in these changing times? How do you cope with it, right? So some of the challenges I think I've spoken of in the current changing times. But at that point in time, I spoke about something a little bit more futuristic, but which has already landed on our laps today. And that is increasingly our environmental is going digital. The economy is being digitally managed. We are becoming digital, in our personal lives. And work atmospheres are also getting digital. Products that we use are becoming digital more and more, right? So I think there is no escape for even compliance, but to be ready for the challenge and pick up on how they can look at things digitally, right? Now, this is not a pitch for technology again, but I'm just saying that, if you have to function in an organization which is going more and more digital, how do you then do that without going digital yourself, right? So that's, I think, is a major change, and that will be a change for the long term. So I'm seeing, I'm not seeing that, compliance officers will ever be replaced, because you need that judgment and the risk management perspective, but they will be enormously helped and supported if they can, harness digitization and digital technology. So let me just go back and look at a few technology questions. Dhanavan, this is for you. What kind of O365 license is required? And probably you should take the second question also, because I think that talks about, I think this is the same question, I think. Yeah, there is one more question. Can it be hosted in the cloud?
Oh, okay.
So probably you can talk about Office 365 as well as the, cloud situation.
Okay, so Office 365, if you have E1, even the basic license E1, if you have, that is more than enough to host this application. So what we have used all the if you see the apps, what we have used is all the free versions of Microsoft. We have not used anything in the major other than the Outlook, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So if we have a even version of this license, that is more than enough to host this application. And the second one is, can it be hosted in the cloud? That's an excellent question. So currently, if your environment is hosted already in the cloud, it can be hosted in the cloud. It's as simple as that, because we are not going to do anything different than your current environment. The solution would come and adapt in your existing environment only. You will not create any, you will not invest anything on the infra separately. So whatever the infra currently you have, the same in the same infra, this solution will sit on top of it and continue to support you. I hope these two my answers questions answers these two questions.
Great. I think there are a few questions that I will take. One of my colleagues in the industry, Jyoti, is asking this question. Questions also arise on outsourcing compliance. If it can be remotely supported, why can't it be outsourced? Very, very valid question. For this, regulators need to be brought on board, as they don't permit outsourcing compliance. SMR kind of regulations can be brought in. Large parts of monitoring can be supported by a platform created by industry participants coming together. I do agree on outsourcing of compliance, but wherever anything is outsourced, the decision making, ownership, and responsibility cannot be outsourced. That's the principle of outsourcing. So I would say that even today, I don't think the regulators are completely opposed to outsourcing. I mean, they have regulations for that, right? What they are saying is that the responsibility of compliance lies with the organization and lies with the designated people within the organization, which is the compliance officer. So long as you have not delegated responsibility out of the organization and it is lying very much with you, and the regulator can hold you accountable, I'm not sure that there is any objection for outsourcing activities as such, right? So it's a fine line. I do agree. It's a very fine line, and we can keep on debating where that line needs to be drawn. But there is a possibility of drawing a line. And what you're talking about, senior management responsibility that is coming up in the UK, I mean, which has already come up in the UK and coming up elsewhere, that, I mean, in a way is already there, right? Here, before you appoint CEOs, you are already taking into, several rounds of approvals are required. Personal accountability has been brought in many cases of investigation, etc. So in a way, SMR is there, but yes, formally that can be brought in. That will reinforce public responsibility and accountability. But with that, I think outsourcing is a strong possibility even today. And if something can be achieved by technology, it can be achieved by outsourcing also. But again, in outsourcing also, you will have to have some kind of good technology there. So I think that sort of probably would answer your question. I will take one or two more quick questions. I think we have more than 5 minutes still left.
Yes.
Akalpit, my good friend, has asked me whether the modules that we talked about can be taken in a bespoke manner, and is the platform mobile, tablet enabled. Dhana, what do you say? I think this for Office 365 as a platform is very mobile.
That's right. That's right. It can be a mobile enabled also. It can be used in the tab. It can be used in the mobile. It can be used in your office also. That's how we built it, right? So beginning, when I try to answer the first question, I said we don't want to put any Strom into this. We want to give after we name it as Breeze, we want to make sure that everything is going to be Breeze, not only the solution, also the technology which is used under the solution. Yeah. So it can be used all the type of mobile, mediums, like it can be on mobile, it can be on the tab. Sorry, Arun, you were saying something?
No, I was just trying to add. I think you explained it well. I was only trying to add to Akalpit's question, saying when you talk about bespoke, our platform is extremely customizable.
That's right.
So as I talked about risk management, I said that I'm only giving you a way in which risk management can be done, but it ultimately depends on you how you want to do it, and this platform will enable that, right? Moving on to another question, my very good old friend, and I'm so happy to see him here, William Raju from the Reserve Bank, ex-Reserve Bank, let us say. He's asked me a question. What is the relationship between audit and compliance? Wow, you're going to get me in trouble. Do you agree that in the change environment, compliance is the first line of defense and not the second line of defense as in the ERM structure?
So I
Well,
heard you're saying from RBI.
yes. So, but a good friend, I said.
I'm just kidding.
So,
Okay.
William, I must say that what you are saying is something our organizations and our businesses would like to happen, right? They would like to delegate to us the first line of defense. But if you look at it, the people who are supposed to do business are the first ones to be held accountable. So therefore, when they do business, they should be doing it in a risk conscious and a risk managing way. So therefore, the first line of defense cannot be taken away from them. And therefore, we will always remain second line of defense. If we become the first line of defense, then you are again letting the business part or the front of the organization to do whatever they want. Just let me. I see one more question. I think it is from Prem from HDFC, if I'm not mistaken. Do we foresee any shift in rule-based regulation in India to principle-based regulation? Wow, how I wish that could happen, right? So, I mean, we can always hope and pray, but remember that we were moving towards a principle-based regulation until all of those various crises around the globe as well as in India started happening, right? And the regulators lost trust. So, if that regaining that trust is going to be a very long drawn process, until then, I'm sure I don't think the regulator will be happy to, give that leeway for us to operate on a principle-based manner. But having said that, when they talk about the rules also, because they cannot make rules for individual banks, they make rules very generally. So some of these rules actually operate as principles. So maybe that is something which we can, take this one from and say that, even when it's a rule that the Reserve Bank is doing, let's look at the principles. Let's look at the intent.
I think you can take one more question, Aaron, if I'm not wrong. We have a couple more minutes left. And try answer one more question. We see a lot of questions are there.
Yeah. I'm just trying to see whether some things we have not covered. Okay, I can probably do this. Should not activities like risk management and assurance performed centrally rather than by each function? Yeah, this is a big debate that is globally happening. We are saying compliance will do its own testing and monitoring. Probably credit risk also does it. Probably, market risk also does it. So should we then, not have, from an efficiency perspective, some kind of a centralized utility? Of course, if you look at it from an efficiency perspective, yes. But if you look at it from a, where does the ownership of the risk lie and who is best placed to look at that particular risk, then probably the risk assessment and this one has to be with the people who are specialists. Because you need to have insights, you have to have nuances. So therefore, when a compliance does its monitoring and risk, monitoring of risk, it will have a different lens from which it will look at it. Other than so then if we centralize this, then there will be very little difference between what audit does and what compliance does. So I agree on the principle of efficiency and standardization, but I also see a huge point in ensuring that we should not lose sight of expertise and nuances. I don't know whether we can take any more questions. I'm just seeing whether 1 minute can be spent, but I think we can spend that 1 minute in terms of trying to thank people who have been so patient and so persistent in following us through this webinar and spending their valuable time. Okay, I'm extremely grateful for all of you in terms of the time that you have spent, the question that you have asked, and I can see the way in which what we said has resonated with you. We indeed want to continue the dialogue and follow it up. Remember that in that sense, we're going to ask for feedback. So you will shortly see emails from us. in terms of the feedback. And we would be very happy to receive some constructive and honest feedback in terms of what you felt and what you would like to do in terms of what we have discussed here. So with that, can I ask my colleague Sampath to sort of conclude this very interactive webinar here?